Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump says he's releasing all the files about President John F. Kennedy's assassination tomorrow. That's about 80,000 unredacted pages. Trump made the announcement while visiting the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Iris Tao has the details on that, plus what the White House said about the bomb threats at the center targeting a New York-based dance company. President Trump is scheduled to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow. Arian Pasdar has the details of the planned conversation, including what the two will discuss. The U.S. military struck the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen over the weekend, and President Trump says Iran will face consequences for any future Houthi attacks. Jason Perry reports. The White House is defending President Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport dozens of alleged members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. That's despite a judge ordering the administration to halt the flights to El Salvador. A deadly storm system that tore through the U.S. over the weekend unleashed devastating tornadoes, wildfires, and dust storms, destroying thousands of homes and businesses across the region. Christina Corona has a weather update.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump says he's scheduled to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow. That's to discuss a possible ceasefire in Ukraine and a contested nuclear power plant. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the Russia update.
I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday.
President Trump on Monday saying he's set to discuss the Ukraine conflict with President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine recently accepted a U.S. proposed 30-day ceasefire. Putin says he still has questions regarding the details of the truce. The conversation with Trump could answer some of those questions. While aboard Air Force One on Monday, Trump gave more details about what to expect from the phone call.
Well, I think we'll be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. Because that's a big question.
Now, the talks between Trump and Putin come as Russia and Ukraine keep attacking each other. And the fighting is especially tense along the front lines in Ukraine and in Russia's Kursk region. One of the contested areas is a nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine, currently controlled by Russia. Moscow and Kyiv have accused each other of risking an accident at the plant because of the airstrikes from both sides.
There's a power plant that is on the border of Russia and Ukraine that was up for discussion with the Ukrainians, and he will address it in his call with Putin tomorrow.
The nuclear plant.
Correct.
Okay.
And the Pentagon on Monday acknowledging that brokering peace between Russia and Ukraine will not be an easy task.
There will likely be difficult conversations to be had on both sides when you're talking about, the release of hostages, when you're talking about potential ceasefire agreements, when you're talking about territory.
Trump on Monday also acknowledged that the U.S. might not be able to bring about peace, although he says there is a high chance the U.S. will be successful. Arian Pasdar, NTD News.
The United States military struck targets belonging to the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen over the weekend. And President Trump says the U.S. will now hold Iran responsible for any future Houthi attacks. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
The United States military released footage over the weekend showing missile launches and a strike on the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist group in Yemen. President Trump recently ordered strikes against the Houthis after they threatened to resume attacking ships in the Red Sea, which they said was in retaliation for Israel's blockade on the Gaza Strip. After the strikes, residents in Yemen were seen scrambling to search for survivors. The Houthis said at least 31 people were killed. On Monday, a U.S. Air Force general at the Pentagon gave details of the operation.
The initial wave of strikes hit over 30 targets at multiple locations, degrading a variety of Houthi capabilities. These included terrorist training sites, unmanned aerial vehicle infrastructure, weapons manufacturing capabilities, and weapons storage facilities. It also included a number of command and control centers, including a terrorist compound where we know several senior Houthi unmanned aerial vehicle experts were located.
But the Houthis did not appear swayed. A spokesman for the Iran-backed terrorist group in Yemen said they responded by firing missiles at a U.S. aircraft carrier. And the leader of the Houthis said they would, quote, meet escalation with escalation. And Iran quickly attempted to distance themselves from the Houthis, saying they had nothing to do with the decisions made by the Iran-backed group in Yemen. But Trump on Truth Social said Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control. But they haven't lost control. They're dictating every move. Trump said the U.S. will hold Iran responsible for any future attacks from the Houthis, and that Iran will suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The Trump administration is strongly defending the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador over the weekend. At issue, whether officials violated a judge's order in doing so.
President Trump on Friday invoked the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged members of Tren Aragua. A day later, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. blocked the application of the law for 14 days and ordered that any deportation flights that were already airborne turn around. Attorney General Pam Bondi filed an emergency motion on Sunday to pause the judge's order, calling it a massive, unauthorized imposition on the executive's authority. The White House borders defended the deportations, saying the planes were already over international waters by the time the order arrived, and that President Trump did the right thing to deliver them to El Salvador.
We removed terrorists. That should be a celebration. We removed terrorists from this country, and I stand by what the president did. I support 100%.
Today at the White House, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt was pressed on whether Trump is allowed to defy a court order.
This administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that.
President Trump was asked about criticism that the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 other times, and all during times of war.
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Sunday on X that El Salvador agreed to hold the hundreds of alleged gang members in their very good jails at a fair price that will also save taxpayer dollars. Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele posted a video to X on Sunday showing agents leading men in handcuffs off a plane at night and into a prison. The dramatic footage shows men in prison whites with their heads forced down, led roughly by masked prison guards. Prison officials are also shown shaving the prisoners' heads. Bukele says the prisoners were immediately transferred to El Salvador's terrorism confinement center. Trump called those deported bad people.
That was a bad group. When you look at them and you look at the crimes that they've committed, you take a look. You don't get any tougher, you don't get worse than that. You understand that.
The administration agreed to pay El Salvador $6 million to hold the alleged members of Tren Aragua and MS-13 in prison for a year. The United States has designated both gangs as terrorist organizations. Inmates at the El Salvador jail are permitted to leave their cells for just 30 minutes each day for exercise, during which they remain shackled. They may work in a prison textile factory, but are barred from visitors and phone calls. Each cell contains 2 Bibles for reading. Meals served 3 times daily include rice, beans, tortillas, and eggs, or pastries a few times a week. Prisoners must eat with their hands, as utensils are considered security risks. They receive basic toiletries, a towel, socks, and have their heads shaved every 5 days. El Salvador built the 40,000 capacity facility following record gang violence in 2022. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
President Trump visiting the Kennedy Center for the first time today after taking it over. It comes as the White House condemns recent bomb threats made against a show at the venue. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has the details.
President Trump says he'll release 80,000 pages of unredacted JFK files on Tuesday. The announcement comes as President Trump visits the Kennedy Center in Washington for the first time after making himself the chairman of its board. Leading a board meeting, the president vows to make the Kennedy Center great again as an emblem of the nation.
I thought it was very important to make this good. It's a very big part of the fabric of Washington, D.C.
Meanwhile, the White House today condemned recent bomb threats with suspected CCP links targeting Shen Performing Arts at the Kennedy Center. The White House told NTD that any foreign state actors involved will be held accountable.
Sure. Thank you, Caroline. So the president is visiting the Kennedy Center this afternoon to attend a board meeting. A question about what happened a few weeks ago. The Kennedy Center got bomb threats targeting a performance by Shen Performing Arts, which is an American company showcasing China before communism. This company has been targeted, unfortunately, by the CCP for years. I'm wondering if this administration has a response to this, and also as the president is putting an emphasis on arts and culture, what's the administration's message to potentially foreign state actors who are trying to disrupt that in the U.S.?
Don't disrupt it. This administration will take that very seriously and hold you accountable. We obviously condemn any violence or threats of violence against American institutions. And the president will be traveling to the Kennedy Center later this afternoon. He is now the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, where he hopes to restore arts and culture that embrace American tradition, don't disparage it, as we have unfortunately seen over the past several years.
Shen Yun, a classical Chinese dance company based in New York, portrays China before communism and tells stories of the CCP's ongoing persecution of Falun Gong, an ancient spiritual practice. Shen Yun's MC says the CCP is escalating its years-long campaign to censor the show, including by threatening not only theaters hosting the show, but also lawmakers supporting Falun Gong.
February 11th, 2025, this was actually sent to the Falun Dafa Information Center. Politicians and congressmen from all countries who support Falun Gong will become targets of attack, and even shooting Trump and driving a vehicle loaded with explosives into the White House are not ruled out.
Despite the fake bomb threats, Shen Yun performed at the Kennedy Center with a large audience. It's also set to perform at New York's Lincoln Center in a week. And on Monday, President Trump says Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping will be visiting Washington in the near future. It comes amid high tensions between the two countries over both tariffs and China's role during COVID, which President Trump still often criticizes. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
President Trump is casting doubt on some pardons issued by former President Biden. Trump said yesterday that Biden signed off on the January 6th committee pardons with an auto pen and said for that reason they should be voided. An auto pen is a device that replicates signatures. Trump argues that President Biden may not have personally approved or been aware of the pardons. He alleges that others were responsible for drafting, approving, and signing the documents. In his final moments as president, Biden granted pardons to Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and members of the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol breach. At least 42 lives have been lost as tornadoes, wildfires, and dust storms ravaged multiple states over the weekend. Now recovery efforts are underway. NTD's Christina Corona has the latest on this story.
On Monday, affected communities were waking up to the destruction after nearly 1,500 storm reports from Friday to Sunday across 8 states.
Everything around it here is really bad. The trailer park up the street had fatalities. So, I mean, we don't have nothing compared to anything like that. I still have a home. They don't.
It's pretty rough. Several people in the community said it's just like what you hear about. It sounds like a freight train coming down the road. So there's a lot of noise and just a lot of debris and a lot of people affected. But in the grand scheme of things, we've got crews out right now from other churches, Church of the Highlands. Disaster relief teams are here in force.
Missouri was hit the hardest with 12 deaths, followed by 8 in Kansas and 6 in Mississippi. The storm produced around 80 tornadoes, including 2 EF4 twisters in Arkansas, with winds reaching up to 190 miles per hour. In Alabama, a tornado flung a school bus onto the roof of a high school and at least 3 people were killed. High winds also turned deadly in North Carolina, where 2 children were killed when a tree crashed through their trailer on Sunday. Recovery efforts are underway with the community coming together to support cleanup and rebuild.
We're just basically helping people get trees off structures, driveways, any kind of help they need, just stuff like that. We got the equipment to do it.
Power remains out for more than 120,000 customers across multiple states as recovery efforts begin. Over the next few days, the Red Cross will be in the impacted communities conducting damage assessments and distributing emergency supplies. On Sunday, Trump announced on Truth Social that the National Guard has been deployed to Arkansas and that his administration is prepared to offer assistance in the wake of the recent devastating tornadoes and severe storms. The storms have weakened as they move east, bringing additional rainfall to the northeast, with some areas potentially receiving over 3 inches. Flood watches are in effect in the northern parts of New York and New England due to heavy rain and snowmelt risk. The rain will exit the New England coast by this evening. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, a Brown University professor was deported to Lebanon despite a judge's order to block her removal from the country. The Department of Homeland Security said that while in Beirut, she attended the funeral of a Hezbollah leader who was responsible for killing hundreds of Americans. The U.S. has a new bird flu strain to deal with. Authorities and experts are searching for better ways to manage outbreaks. Jason Blair reports after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. An assistant professor at Brown University's medical school was deported to Lebanon despite a judge's order to block her removal from the country. Dr. Rasha Alawi is a Lebanese citizen who lives in Providence. She's held a U.S. visa since 2018. She was detained Thursday after returning to the U.S. from a trip to Lebanon, according to a lawsuit filed by her cousin. On Friday, a federal judge ordered the government to provide the court with 48 hours notice before deporting the doctor, but Alawi was flown back to Lebanon anyway. U.S. Customs and Border Protection told the court its officers didn't get word about the order until she left. The Department of Homeland Security said in a post on X that Alawi went to Lebanon to attend the funeral of a dead Hezbollah leader who was, quote, responsible for killing hundreds of Americans over a 4-decade terror spree. The agency added that Alawi openly admitted this, as well as her support of that deceased leader to customs officers. A spokesperson for the DHS says supporting terrorists is grounds for revoking a visa. The judge rescheduled today's hearing, giving the government a week to provide more information. Last week, the Trump administration set in motion plans to deport a former Columbia University student and green card holder whom they believe is a threat to national security. The move has raised legal questions about whether a lawful permanent resident can be deported. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards breaks down the pros and cons.
The Immigration and Nationality Act says an immigrant who promotes terrorist activity can't stay in the U.S. Now, some argue that only applies to temporary visitors. So can a lawful permanent resident be deported? The act deems deportable any immigrant who engages in activities that threaten national security. Now, this comes from Section 1182 of the act. It says any alien that the Secretary of State or Attorney General determines has been associated with a terrorist organization and intends, while in the United States, to engage solely, principally, or incidentally in activities that could endanger the welfare, safety, or security of the United States is inadmissible. Meaning the person can't even come into the country. So if the person does get in and then engages in those activities, he can be deported. Now, when people think about immigration laws, they typically think it applies to foreigners who are here on a temporary basis, such as a visitor, a student, an employee, or even someone who got in illegally. But according to the law, even if the immigrant got a green card, the Secretary of State or the Attorney General can revoke it. And once that green card is revoked, he can be deported. Now, the language comes from Section 1227 of the Act. It says any alien with permanent resident status who has had such status terminated under such respective section is deportable. Now, commentaries argue that if the government tries to remove a green card holder for expressing his views, that's a threat to free speech. The First Amendment does protect a person's right to exchange ideas, and it even provides a form of redress to citizens against their government. But there are exceptions, though. For example, a citizen who uses fighting words is not protected by the First Amendment. Fighting words are words or phrases that tend to cause an immediate disturbance or cause someone else to act unlawfully in response. But here's the thing. The First Amendment applies to a citizen of the United States, and a person who has a green card isn't really a citizen. But even if he's treated as a citizen, there's still a question about whether his speech violated the First Amendment.
A new bird flu strain has been detected in the U.S. This new strain is reportedly deadlier than the current H5N1 strain of bird flu that's currently spreading. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
A new strain of bird flu called H7N9 has been detected and reportedly has not been seen in the U.S. since 2017. Now, according to the World Organization for Animal Health, this new strain was detected in Mississippi in a commercial chicken flock. And currently they are depopulating, or what's known as culling, the chickens to deal with this outbreak. And this is on top of the current H5N1 strain that has been spreading and increasing egg prices across the country. One expert told NTD that the current process of culling being used both targets the sick and healthy chickens, which isn't normally the case.
And you know, there's perverse incentives. The big egg manufacturers, we call them big egg, they get government subsidies if they do this large-scale culling, and then they get to sell their products at the marketplace at a higher price. So you don't hear Cal-Maine or any of the other big companies complaining.
And another expert told NTD that the primary source for humans being infected by the bird flu, currently there are 70 in the country, are directly related to the culling process, and he thinks there's a better way.
We don't need to mass kill the birds. 3 studies now show that chickens do survive H5N1 infection. Actually, a lot of them will survive. They will get natural immunity, and this will result in this pandemic going away faster than if we just kill all the chickens and nobody gets any immunity.
And another option, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has put in $100 million toward research for a possible bird flu vaccine, which would stop or at least reduce the cullings. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, a bipartisan effort is underway to counter the Chinese Communist Party's repression on U.S. soil. This as the State Department restricts visas to combat human rights abuses. Melina Weiskup reports. And we speak with Lishai Lemish, Master of Ceremonies at Shen Performing Arts, to discuss why the New York-based dance company is being targeted by the Chinese regime. Shen has received numerous bomb threats, including at the Kennedy Center in D.C., where President Trump visited today. That's coming up after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer on Capitol Hill. A bipartisan effort is underway to counter the Chinese Communist Party's repression on U.S. soil. This comes as the State Department restricts visas to government officials who cooperate with China. NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
House lawmakers have reintroduced 3 bills that would give the Department of Homeland Security more tools to combat foreign governments' attempts to intimidate and silence dissidents. The bills would dedicate personnel and resources to investigate transnational repression, a crime in which China is a leading perpetrator, according to Freedom House, a Washington-based nonprofit. A recent example is several fake bomb threats made to scare audience members attending Shen Yun, a performing arts company showcasing ancient Chinese civilization before the Chinese Communist Party took over.
Traditional Chinese culture is really rooted in spirituality, in a lot of traditional beliefs. And those are the things that the Communist Party has been trying to wipe out for decades since they took over. These recent threats that Shen Yun has received, these bomb threats, these mass shooting threats, including sexually very violent and graphic threats that targeted female performance members.
Congressman August Pfluger said the hostile acts we're seeing across the country are a direct challenge to our nation's sovereignty and infringe upon American civil liberties. Pfluger is a lead sponsor of the bills to combat transnational repression. Alongside this congressional action, the State Department has restricted visas of foreign government officials who cooperate with the CCP to forcibly return people to China who are subject to torture and persecution at the hands of the regime. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss the Chinese regime's escalating acts of aggression is Lishai Lemish, Master of Ceremonies at Shen Performing Arts. Lishai, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, our White House correspondent Iris Tao asked the White House press secretary today about the recent threats, including a bomb threat at the Kennedy Center against Shen Yun. Let's actually listen to her response.
A question about what happened a few weeks ago. The Kennedy Center got bomb threats targeting a performance by Shen Performing Arts, which is an American company showcasing China before communism. This company has been targeted, unfortunately, by the CCP for years. I'm wondering if this administration has a response to this, and also as the president is putting an emphasis on arts and culture, what's the administration's message to potentially foreign state actors who are trying to disrupt that in the U.S.?
Don't disrupt it. This administration will take that very seriously and hold you accountable. We obviously condemn any violence or threats of violence against American institutions. And the president will be traveling to the Kennedy Center later this afternoon. I look forward to going with him. As you know, he is now the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, where he hopes to restore arts and culture that embrace American tradition, don't disparage it, as we have unfortunately seen over the past several years. The president will be doing a tour of the center. In his business developer mind, I'm sure he will make some recommendations on how the center itself can be improved, but also we'll be discussing perhaps some future plays and musicals and theatrical programs that the center will be hosting under his new leadership and the board's new leadership.
So, Lishai, first, what's your reaction to the White House press secretary's response? How do you see the U.S. handling these threats so far and going forward?
Well, thank you, Tiffany, and thank you to your correspondent who brought this up. I think it's really tremendous to have this brought up in such a national level, because this is something we've been facing really for the 18 years that Shen Yun has been around, and increasingly so this last tour. We've received now close to 30 bomb threats in theaters where we're scheduled to perform. And just to be clear, these are pranks. These are scare tactics. We don't take them lightly. We always have the police alerted, and they come with the canines and they check, but these are just attempts to scare people away. And it's within the context of this overall transnational repression of the Chinese Communist Party in America, specifically here against Shen Yun Performing Arts. This is just the latest form of it.
And let's step back a bit here. What exactly is Shen Yun? How was it founded? What about it seems to pose such a threat to the Chinese regime?
So Shen Yun was founded in 2006 in New York with the explicit mission of reviving traditional culture. If you've seen our billboards, which you see them everywhere, the tagline is right there, China before communism. And so through stories and legends and folk and ethnic traditions, through classical Chinese dance and live music, the performance breathes life into this ancient civilization that was really brought to the brink of extinction by the Chinese Communist Party, most notably during the Cultural Revolution, but really over 75 years of rule, deliberately trying to wipe out this ancient heritage. And here is Shen Yun bringing it to the stage at the Kennedy Center, coming up at Lincoln Center, all over the world, in front of dignitaries from every walk of life. And this terrifies the CCP because this is the very culture it's tried to destroy. And here's a group based in New York, outside its control, bringing this culture back to life and showing people what China was like before communism and what China could be like without communism. Another big part of the story is Shen Yun was founded by Falun Gong practitioners, many of whom had escaped persecution in China. Among them were elite artists from around the world, choreographers, composers, dancers, and musicians. And they said, let's bring this culture back to life. And at the same time, let's use this medium of performing arts, the beauty of dance, to show what is happening to people in China today under the tyranny of the CCP. Not only how brutally they're being persecuted, but also the courage of their resistance and their faith and their integrity. And let's put that on stage. And every year, among the 20 pieces, we have one or two dances about this on stage. And they tend to be some of the most moving and memorable pieces for the audience. People are moved to tears by the courage of what's happening to practitioners in China and how they're resisting it peacefully. And I think that's another thing that the CCP is very afraid of, because here's a persecution campaign that's gone on for a quarter of a century that the Chinese Communist Party is pretending does not exist, has spent all this money on propaganda trying to cover it up. And here we are performing it at the Kennedy Center.
I want to go back to one of your earlier points. Why do you think there's an uptick in threats recently, whether that's the emails, the bomb threats, or even slashed tires? Why now?
So actually, we received several leaked documents actually that came in through the Falun Dafa Information Center earlier last year, talking about an escalation, a kind of endgame type campaign from the Chinese Communist Party to wipe out Shenyun right here in the United States and to go after the Falun Gong community more broadly. In this campaign, they talked about several tactics. One of them is strengthening certain influencers on social media. They named them specifically who are aligned with the Chinese Communist Party, trying to influence mainstream media. And that's why you see attacks on Shenyun in mainstream media. It's very much related to this overall campaign. And trying to pit the United States government against Shenyun Performing Arts, trying to start frivolous lawsuits, trying to have investigations. This is all detailed in their internal meetings that were leaked out. There's another individual who said that Xi Jinping was specifically behind this. And so we've really seen an escalation. The bomb threats started at the end of last tour, around March and April of 2024. And then once we started tour again in December, there have been over 24 now of these bomb threats in theaters. We just got a few of them here in Birmingham and in Huntsville, Alabama, in Des Moines, in St. Louis, all over Europe, another one in Taiwan, in Australia, wherever we're performing. These are just pranks, but they're basically threatening terrorism, bombs, mass shootings, rape, and they even threaten congressmen who support Shenyun. They've threatened President Trump, the Heritage Foundation. The list goes on and on. They say they're going to leave their bodies in the streets of D.C. or by the Statue of Liberty. And this is very much connected to the overall transnational repression of the CCP. And I hope that the U.S. administration, having now seen this right there in the Capitol, will take the further stance of trying to find who these people are who are behind this, who's sending these intimidating emails, to try to find them and try to find their connection to people in Beijing and really speak up about it. And just like with the Fox Hunt and other transnational repression operations of the CCP, send these people back or arrest them here. We've already had a couple of PRC spies who were arrested for trying to revoke Shenyun's nonprofit status organization. And this is it's not just the tip of the iceberg.
And zooming out a bit, we are seeing that bipartisan push on the Hill against transnational repression. There's the long arm of the CCP. Of course, the Falun Gong Protection Act introduced in the Senate, etc. Now, with Shenyun's mission of representing or presenting China before communism, do you feel the tide is turning with the growing awareness across the U.S. about the nature of the Chinese regime?
Absolutely. I think we've seen that tide turning the last few years since COVID and everything that's happening with fentanyl and the spy balloons and what's happening in Hong Kong. I think people are much more clear-eyed about what the Chinese Communist Party is. And what Shenyun really does is say, this is not the Chinese people. This is not China. The problem is the Chinese Communist Party, and even Chinese people have a problem with the Chinese Communist Party. The Falun Gong Protection Act, that's a huge step forward. I'm so happy to see that introduced into Senate. I think there's going to be a lot of support for it. It's really time, and people are being killed for their organs in China. Innocent people who are just like me, meditating in the park one day, the next day they're in prison, and they're being killed for their organs on demand. This is something we've touched upon in the Shenyun performance. There should be a lot of support for this. If people want to support that right to their senators, I think this is a great time to do that. It is so important because that's really a lot of what drives Shenyun and the Falun Gong practitioners performing for Shenyun is this sense of mission. People in China are dying for no reason. They are being killed by an authoritarian and brutal regime, and they need every ounce of support they can get from outside of China. I think this administration right now is in a great position to do that.
Lisha Lemage, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany.
And Shenyun returned to St. Louis, Missouri over the weekend. This time, a state representative brought recognition from the entire state legislature. He praised the performance for its uplifting message to the world. Hear more on that, plus audience reactions to Shenyun, which NTD has proudly sponsored since 2006.
Missouri State Representative Ben Keithley was among attendees watching Shenyun in St. Louis on Saturday. He presented a resolution passed by the state legislature honoring the New York-based performing arts group.
It's a pleasure to be here at the Seifel Center Theater for another one of your performances. I've been long looking forward to coming to one of these and happy to be here today with all of you and present you with this resolution on behalf of the Missouri House of Representatives and Speaker of the House John Patterson, along with Representatives Holly Jones, Justin Sparks, Tara Peters, and myself, Ben Keithley.
Through classical Chinese dance and live orchestral music, Shen brings China's 5,000 years of culture and history to life on stage. Audience members were impressed by the artist's energy and the message of their performance.
They were just fantastic, just incredible, and you could feel the passion and the emotion from both the dancers and the orchestra.
It's so enchanting, and it really carries you away into a far-off place. We are in the second row, and the energy from the dancers coming off the stage is just palpable. You can just feel it. And the music is absolutely gorgeous. It's so beautiful.
I also like the fact that they are trying to bring back the culture of the religion within China that is not being exercised today.
We were amazed by the beauty, the music, and more importantly, the message. The message of freedom and love of creation, and more importantly, love of God. So that was what really touched us from this show. I think the American people need to stand with the people who are fighting against the communist governments, both in China and in North Korea and other places around the world.
And thank you for bringing your message to the United States of a message of uplifting, of health, and escaping oppression, and everything that your group and the companies and your theater performance bring in that message to the world, not only the United States, but the world, and all you all go through to bring that message to all of us. And we very much appreciate all your work, and we wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's fantastic. I'm going to encourage all my friends and family to come see this show if they have the opportunities.
We'll definitely come again. It was inspiring. It's just beautiful. So everyone should come and see it.
Shen will perform in Utah, California, New Jersey, and other areas in the U.S. on March 19th through the 23rd. NTD News, St. Louis, Missouri.
Coming up, bagpipes, plenty of grain, and a celebration of Irish culture. The world-famous St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York City took place today. Chris Beers was there. And in college hoops, get out your tournament brackets because March Madness is finally here. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Today is St. Patrick's Day, and the New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade marched up Fifth Avenue for 5 hours. The parade celebrates the patron saint of Ireland, as well as the rich cultural heritage of the Emerald Isle. NTD's Chris Beers was there this afternoon.
I'm here at the 264th New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade. It was founded in the 1700s, 14 years before the United States was actually founded. I did get the chance to speak to a board member of the parade earlier today. Let's watch that.
I'm first generation Irish. My parents are Irish. They immigrated to this country back in the 1950s. And I've been coming to this parade since I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And it's just part of my heritage, it's part of my culture. And I'm here to make sure that it's here for the next generation.
Why do you think this parade has such longevity?
I think Irish Americans in general and Irish are very proud of their heritage and their roots, and I think they love coming out here in the city of New York and just professing who they are and where they came from and what we've accomplished, as an ethnic group.
There are over 2 million people watching the St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York City today. I did get the chance to speak with some of them.
It's so good. Very fun. Very nice.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're having a great time. Amazing. Great time.
Where are you from? What does it mean to be here at this parade as a person who's Irish?
Oh, good question. Well, I suppose I'm sort of standing in the footsteps of all the people who emigrated, and all the people who left Ireland during the time of the famine and other times as well. So I suppose I'm kind of here in their spirits.
I noticed a lot of people come all the way from Ireland to see this parade. Why do you think that is?
I think they owe so much to America, and they try to give it back, and welcome them, and just show how grateful they are for all the work that they've done for us.
Well, there's a saying, they say the luck of the Irish. So are you lucky?
Yes. Yes. Are we on TV?
Yes. Well.
Yes.
The Grand Marshal for this year's parade is a gentleman named Michael Benn from Rockaway in Queens. He was made the Grand Marshal because of his dedication to this holiday and actually to his community in Rockaway. After Hurricane Sandy hit that area, devastating it in 2012, he rallied the community despite the fact that almost everyone's home was damaged to throw another St. Patrick's Day parade, persevering in spite of that challenge of that time. Chris Beers, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, especially in college basketball. March Madness, of course, begins this week, and yesterday was Selection Sunday for the NCAA tournament field. What were some of your key takeaways?
First, the SEC getting in 14 of their 16 teams. I mean, that was incredible. Of course, we knew as the week went along, it looked like they were going to get either 13 or 14. They got 14, which was a record. I always thought, though, this would be done by the Big 12, the ACC. The SEC has been traditionally a football powerhouse. I guess they're into basketball now, too. Now, as far as the actual picks, Auburn getting the top overall seed was somewhat surprising given they've lost 3 of the last 4 games. They have been number 1 throughout the season. They did win the toughest conference, the SEC, so I'll give them that. But at the same point, who gets the top overall seed? It's not actually a huge advantage. I mean, you don't actually get, of course, home court advantage in this tournament. You do get to play closer to home, but there's a huge difference from here. I mean, closer to home still means it's a neutral site. Neutral fans, meanwhile, they do not root technically for the favorite. They're always rooting for the underdog. Everyone wants to go see, Princeton beating UCLA or something like that. So sometimes these neutral sites actually turn into road games for the favorites. Anyway, Duke is also listed as the betting favorite to win according to ESPN Bet. I mean, this past week, them winning the ACC tournament without Player of the Year candidate Cooper Flagg was very impressive. So we'll have to see with them.
Well, I assume you've already made your tournament pick, so who do you have winning?
You assume correct, Tiff. I've got Florida winning. I actually made that as pick a couple weeks ago. They had a very impressive win at Alabama. This week, them winning the SEC tournament did nothing to deter that. They were very impressive this week. They're so deep, especially in the front court. It seems like everyone on their team can rebound. They move the ball well. Everyone is also a threat from deep, and they push the pace knowing they've got that depth. My only concern about them is that actually the region they're in is very difficult. If they win their first round matchup, which they really should, and if UConn wins theirs, who's a 2-time defending champions, those two will meet in the second round. You've also got Kansas as the number 7 seed there. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not actually choosing Kansas to win, but they still have that big name there. You also have a 2nd seed is St. John's, led by Rick Pitino. Now, this used to be a powerhouse program back in the 80s under Lou Carnesecca. Pitino, meanwhile, in his 2nd season, already has them back. And if you remember Pitino at Louisville, at Kentucky, at Providence, he always had his team ready come March time. So we'll have to see if he's got that same formula for success still going here at St. John's.
Well, during yesterday's selection show, NCAA Chairman Bubba Cunningham talked about player availability being something they discussed when talking about West Virginia just missing the cut. What was he referencing here?
Yeah, he's referencing one of West Virginia's top players is not going to be available for the NCAA tournament, and how that's actually kind of a strike against the team's resume. Now, personally, I disagree that this should be a factor at all for any team. Instead of just focusing on what the team accomplished, on the court, because essentially through no fault of their own, they're being penalized for what the committee doesn't think they can do without one of their star players. I mean, you never know how a team is going to adjust. Maybe they go to a smaller lineup. Maybe they look to the bench and they find a star there. But for the committee to decide this for themselves, I feel it's very nearsighted. And West Virginia officials, they were not very happy about this at all. In fact, the governor, Patrick Morrisey, state governor, has already asked his attorney general to work with the NCAA to ensure that their selection process is fair and transparent. So we'll see what comes from this.
Well, Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.